Are you thinking about buying an investment property for your child to live in while they're away at college? Well, here are some questions you need to ask yourself first. And you don't even need to have a kid going to college to know that it costs a ton of money. But when you do have a student that's about to enter college or is already there, you become extremely aware of how much it actually costs. So for those who aren't quite there yet, when you hear how much tuition is, that number often doesn't include room and board. So on top of what you pay for the cost of classes per year, you also need to include housing, which can be a hefty amount. And according to a recent article that was published by the Education Data Initiative, the average room and board cost can range anywhere from a low of about $8,000 to a high of about $14,000 a year. And of course, this average cost varies depending on whether it's a private or public school and whether it's a 2 or 4 year school, in-state, out-of-state, all kinds of factors. But an average 4-year public school is about $12,600 a year, and an average private school is about $14,400 a year. And these are just averages, so the cost may be higher or lower depending on the school your child attends, the type of accommodations they choose. For example, the fee for a single occupancy room is going to be a lot higher than a dorm or a shared suite. So regardless, no matter where a student goes to college or what their living arrangements are, a significant amount of money will be spent on their housing, which is why it makes sense for some parents to buy an investment property for their child to live in while in college. But does it really make sense? Let me rephrase that. Does it make sense for you? And there's no absolute answer to whether or not it makes sense to buy an investment property for your child to live in while at college. But it certainly could be a wise decision for some parents and students, but it really depends on a lot of factors. And here are some of the questions you need to ask yourself if this is something you are considering. First of all, will your child even be allowed to live off campus? Some colleges and universities require that students live on campus, at least for a period of time. So if your child is only required to live on campus their freshman year, you'd be looking at 3 years from benefiting from an investment property as a place for them to live. Does the math make sense? Would buying a place actually be more cost effective than paying for a dorm? Depending on the real estate market in the area, the cost of buying a place or even just paying the property taxes could be more than the cost it would be to just pay for the dorm. Is it worth having to pay for repairs and maintenance? It's almost impossible to put an exact number on, but don't forget to factor in the cost of, some emergencies and just general upkeep every year. Is your child going to be responsible enough to handle living in their own place and being in charge of it? It can be a great growing and learning experience for your kid to live in their own place and be responsible for the day-to-day upkeep. But it can also be overwhelming or at least distracting for a student who's not quite ready for that kind of responsibility, and it can impact their ability to focus on school. A big one is, are you counting on other students to also pay the rent? One way other people justify the cost of buying a place is if they're able to defray the cost by having other students pay the rent to live there as well. So if that's your plan, try to make sure that you have some other students that your child feels comfortable living with and who are committed to renting there. Have them sign a lease. It is very easy for a student to say they want to live somewhere, and it's just as easy for them to back out or have their parents not agree to an arrangement. So if you're counting on tenants that don't pan out, you could end up paying more than you would for a dorm. Are you also prepared for any potential risks and liabilities? Not saying your child's a party animal, but be honest with yourself. You know that if you buy a place, that's a good chance that it might become the site of a party. And unfortunately, some parties can lead to problems and legal issues. Or is your child going to live out on having a social life? On the other hand, living off campus may keep your child out of the loop on what's going on. And they wouldn't be as involved with things going on with the school that they would have been if they were living in the dorm. So if they start by living in campus their first year, they may decide that they prefer that, especially if that's where their social life is. What if your student decides to transfer? A lot of students end up transferring to another school after a year or two. So what would you do if your child left the area? Would you keep the house, rent it, sell it? Will the house appreciate enough over time? Over the course of the time that they're in school, are you going to make enough to recoup carrying costs, closing costs, and the cost to sell it in 3-4 years? It's impossible to say just how much a house is going to appreciate during a period of time, but you do need to be prepared that it might not appreciate enough to make a profit after 4 years of college. Will it be easy to sell if your child graduates or transfers? You need to make sure that you're not buying a house in an area where there's not a lot of buyers in the area. So if you're considering that buying a house, be aware that it might take some time to sell it after you don't need it anymore. So have a plan to be prepared to hold on to it for a rental, maybe have somebody management if needed if your child moves out of the area. And these questions aren't meant to scare you away from buying an investment property for your child to live in while they're at college. It's just meant to help you make a well-informed decision. And if you feel like this is the right decision for you and your child, then reach out to a local agent and ask them to recommend their best savvy agent in the area who could help you make the best decision possible.